Hi, folks. So, welcome to another episode of Science of the Times. How are you, Tim?
I'm good. I've actually had quite a good week. It's been fairly mellow. I've been in Oxford. How about you?
Yeah, me too. Been around. It's been nice to nice and calm, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I mean, term time is flat out, particularly for you, isn't it? I know you do a lot of teaching,
Not a lot
and
of tutorials.
yeah, and so it's nice when there's a bit of a break, isn't it, to catch breath?
So, I think this week in scientifically has been exciting for you, right? So, there's been a lot of headlines about colossal and dire wolves, and obviously wolves are close to your heart.
No, that's right. Well, as you know, one of my places I work is Yellowstone National Park, where we've studied wolves, and so Colossal Bioscience is this biotech company that has announced, recently that what they claim to be doing is de-extincting the dire wolf. And I don't know if much has come up in any of your social media feeds about it.
It's been everywhere. I think it's been the big science story, for the last few weeks, really.
So yeah, we've what we've done is we've got a couple of people, both who I admit I know, and that's why they were able to come on at quite short notice, I think. And I'm looking forward to chatting to both of them because they're going to hold slightly different views on it.
Oh, excellent.
So we'll have a little wash up at the end, but hopefully it's going to help our listeners actually get their heads around what the issues are and what the benefits are, and then they'll be able to decide what Colossal Biosciences have done.
And I think that's important because for any breaking science story, it's rare that there's only one side to it. And it's important for people to make their own minds up, I guess.
That's right. Well, let's get our first guest on. It's a real pleasure today, Simon, to have two guests on today. And the first one is Bridgett vonHoldt. She's going to introduce herself in a sec, but she's one of the world's, if not probably the world's leading wolf geneticists. So it's an absolute pleasure to have her on all the way from Princeton.
That's exciting. And wolves right up your street. Right?
Wolves. I know Bridgett and I have worked together. So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get Bridgett to introduce herself.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Also flattering that you call me the world expert. I think about I'm tucked into my own work, doing day-to-day stuff. But yes, I'm Bridgett vonHoldt. I'm a professor at Princeton University. I'm in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and I am an expert in canine genomics. I specialize on species and evolutionary lineages of canids in North America. So mostly that means I think about gray wolves and coyotes and red wolves and Mexican wolves, and every now and then the eastern wolf will pop into my world.
And also, and we'll come to this later, but also dire wolves, no less.
And now seemingly, yes, dire wolf.
Yeah. So I wonder, I wonder if you'd like to tell us a little bit about any studies that are really exciting you at the moment. I know you've been doing some work on red wolves and coyotes, for example, and they're a bit of a mix and a bit of a mess and everything at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, I usually call them the hot mess. Although a lot of canine species are messy, and this is where I think, Tim, you're alluding to. The questions I like to ask in my research is about genetic exchange and hybridization and other terms like admixture and introgression. That's represented by looking at genes that end up being shared across species. And the question I like to ask is, how is that genetic sharing possible? Is it because they are hybridizing and exchanging genes in between these different species? Or are the questions more complex about the evolutionary history? If two canine lineages are very recently diverged from each other, they're probably still sharing a lot of DNA. So when we look then at two species and we don't remember or know how recently related they are, and they share a lot of DNA, we might just presume, oh, they're hybridizing, when in fact the picture is far more complicated. So the hot mess is a lot of the canine species in North America do indeed have a lot of gene sharing, probably predominantly because they're far more recently related than other examples we might, want to use. But they also do have a lot of reproduction that's possible between those lineages. So wolves and coyotes and dogs can reproduce. They're interfertile, and their offspring are fertile. So we can really have a hot mess happen really quickly with just a few animals, and things spread like wildfire.
So I guess, Bridget, those genes that cross or are shared, they would be advantageous genes. There'd be some, or is that not necessarily the case?
It's a little bit of column A and a little bit from column B. So I suppose the rest of my answer is I try to apply those kinds of complicated scenarios to understand species that are usually threatened or endangered in North America. And that's a really good question about, are these pieces of DNA that get moved around from one species to another, sometimes they can be advantageous and beneficial. We do know from our own human history, we all carry a little bit of Neanderthal DNA, and there's a lot of discussion around most of that content has some impact on immunity, and that's probably probably been maintained in our own genomes because we might see a benefit from that. Now, it depends on where we live, what's our demographic background, what kind of other things do we have in our genome. But in canines, we do see something similar. For example, melanism, or the coat color that is purely black, that when it appears in wolves, work with Tim here, we're learning a lot about how that coat color and the gene that encodes for that, how that gene, where it came from and how it impacts the animal, and what are the dynamics of it in a living organism. So that gene,
go on, keep going.
That gene that completely controls if an animal is melanistic or if it's not. And if it's not melanistic, we call that agouti, this kind of standard looking wolf. It's got kind of a gray brownish coat. If it carries the mutation for being melanistic, there appears to be some trade-off in some aspects of life. That mutation that causes this melanism is also a gene that functions in a lot of different things, but predominantly in immunity. So we see things very possibly that if an animal carries the mutation, they are melanistic, so they're a black animal. And for wild wolf populations, we're finding that there is an added benefit, but there's a trade-off that a black wolf could have a longer lifespan, but we see then fewer pups, possibly on average, produced by those animals. And then we can kind of dig into this idea that you only have so many energetic and physiological resources in an organism. If you put more of that into the pot of immunity to live longer, you're probably taking it out of some other activity. And that's like, how many offspring can you produce, or how many can you nurse and provision and maintain survival? So there are benefits. I didn't even tell you where that mutation came from yet, did I?
It came from domestic dogs, didn't it?
It came from domestic dogs something like 14,000 years ago.
So hybridization is a good thing, is what you're saying.
With some conditionals, yeah, I do think it is. So that's one example, I think, of this nice. It's an advantage, though there are some trade-offs. This mutation evolved in dogs, ended up over in wolves, has also been transferred to coyotes in North America, but it's old, so it doesn't mean any animal that's melanistic is a dog hybrid. And that's where some of the communication changes based on where you see a black wolf or a black coyote. It could be a hybrid. It could have a parent or a grandparent that is a dog, but it could also not have that because it's inherited it from its coyote parents and great-grandparents, because this is a 14,000-year-old mutation that's just been trickling now down through time in coyotes or in gray wolves or also in domestic dogs.
So, Bridgett, forgive this naive chemist's question. So we had a podcast about sort of dogs, domestic dogs, and tracing the ancestors sort of back to wolves. And now we're talking about a mutation that originates in domestic dogs and has gone backwards to wolves. So have I understood that correctly? So it's almost sort of gone back the other way a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Dogs and wolves do share a common ancestor. A lot of, I think, what's important in that framework is knowing that dogs and wolves can reproduce with each other.
Yes.
And when they do that, as they've acquired traits or new genetic mutations, since they diverged, they do now have an opportunity for things to get swapped around, whether it's beneficial or not. In that case, this was a mutation that evolved in dogs. That's where it arose. And 14,000 years ago, as dogs were kind of roaming the landscape, they're proto-dogs. They're kind of early on in dog domestication. They were probably mingling with wolves. And one of those proto-dogs had this melanism phenotype and carried this mutation. And then maybe had some little tryst with a wolf and thereby transferred it over to the wolf population. And then it spread, reasonably high frequency across North America. At least there's a lot of work done on the North American spread of this melanism mutation. And that helps us understand the benefits of it. Now, I do want to go back to Tim's comment about that I think hybridization is a good thing. And so I'm a defender, and I like to champion admixture, which is the result of hybridization. That when two very different organisms, whether they're different species or just different types, when they have offspring together, those offspring immediately now have a brand new combination of genetic variation. They have both the good and the bad from each of their parents. Not everything is expected to play well with each other. So all of the genes, like from a wolf and all of the genes from a coyote, when they find themselves together in that first generation of a hybrid, there's going to be some things that work well and some things that don't. But what I really think about is this is a tremendously fast way for new things to just come about. And in my field, we like to think about what are the mechanisms that make new genetic diversity. And genetic diversity is so important for evolution and adaptation. But a lot of the way,
No, keep going.
A lot of the times we point to some very slow things that make new genetic diversity, like mutation rate. We're like, oh, if you wait around long enough, something will mutate. And it might be good. It might be bad. So we're putting a lot of our eggs in the basket that every 5 million meiotic events, we might have something change, and then it might hopefully be good. So that happens, regardless if we like it or not. That mutation rate will always be happening. But when we're looking at something like climate change or anthropogenic activities, and we're hoping that species can kind of deal with this very quickly changing world, we want them to deal with it faster than what the mutation rate really permits. So admixture, or the product of hybridization, is one generation's worth of time where new things can come together and maybe new things form. And all of a sudden, there's a bunch of new creative outcomes. And we can be far more hopeful that adaptation can happen at a faster rate.
And actually that
hybridization.
So, and in fact, that sort of hybridization underpins things like the diversity of cichlid fish in places like Lake Victoria and Lake Malawi, I think. So it's a great way of generating new things. But can you undo it? So say you had a population of, I don't know, choosing randomly coyotes and red wolves. Could you recreate the red wolf from...
It sounds so random, Tim. I love the setup. Absolutely. I also think full-heartedly we can come up with a thought experiment and probably even a real design for how, if you have basically a palette of paint that you've mixed everything together, the traditional thought is if you mix all your paints together into this brown mud puddle of a thing, you can never recover all of your original paint colors, right? Like you got brown from blue and yellow and green and red, and now you can't really reconstitute those original things. But thank goodness DNA doesn't really work like that all the time. And I think, can absolutely, and there's been some programs that show their success in taking these admixed genomes, they're mosaics of ancestry from different sources, that you could work to kind of isolate and concentrate certain parts of that. So the kind of the breeding design, we can think about cattle or we can think about plants, that if you take two very distinct breeds of cattle, one is maybe giant and muscular and the other one is maybe a dairy breed. The first generation of crossing that animal, you have 50% genetic ancestry to each of those. And very quickly, you can take that animal, that generation, and either cross it back to the dairy cow to enhance the dairy genetic ancestry in it, or you could cross them back to the big, beefy, muscular thingy, whatever breed that is, and you can start planning how that inheritance of ancestry can be enhanced. You can concentrate it. So for red wolves and coyotes, we find, I'm going to change the setting, no more agricultural species, but now we're in the wild. Let's think about these incredible landscapes of Louisiana, southern Louisiana. There aren't a lot of people. It's coastal prairie, lots of wet kind of prairie, swamp, rice paddies, and not a lot of people. The grass is fairly tall. The trees are scrubby. Coyotes live here, and they are incredibly successful at avoiding people. There's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of roads. We've found that these coyotes carry upwards of 70% genetic ancestry identified as red wolf DNA. As much, these animals we've sampled last year. But the red wolf has been extinct from the wild for 45 years, since 1980. That's when the federal government declared them extinct in the wild. They only live under human care. So if I can go to Louisiana tomorrow, sample a coyote, sequence it, and find that 70% of its DNA is red wolf, like, how did it get there? And those are really high numbers. So where did it come from? And it's like still going. It's still out there. The red wolf 45 years ago, the red wolf is gone. So we need a lot of animals to really kind of understand, how is that red wolf ancestry in existence?
So Bridgett, if it's 70% red wolf, how can we still call that a coyote? Is it not more red wolf now than coyote?
Yeah, so this might connect to the dire wolf conundrum of what species concept do you favor? Do you support most? Species concepts, you can grab your own, and it feels like a circus, right? Because we can each come to the table valuing something different based on our education, based on our experience, based on the confidence we have in certain data types, also based in the biological system. Are these mammals? Are they asexual selfing plants? Is their generation time 10 days or is it 10 years? Like, all of these things matter, but each of us come to these questions with our own, maybe, momentary, like, oh, I value this right now, but the more I learn, I'm probably going to switch which concept, which definition I use.
So, Bridgett, just for our listeners, are you saying that there's some conflict in terms of what's agreed upon as the definition of a species?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The most simplistic and the original definition is called the biological species concept. And that is simply saying if two organisms can reproduce with each other, they belong to the same species. But that can also fall apart with very closely related species. I just told you dogs, wolves, and coyotes can reproduce, but they all belong to a different species. Canis latrans, Canis lupus. Dogs are kind of in the weird place, so we'll just set aside the domesticates. Wolves and coyotes can reproduce. So if I just like the definition of the biological species concept, then I'm kind of up a creek without a paddle, because wolves and coyotes then appear to be the same species. But as time and our sort of era of intellect and thinking about all these really deep philosophies of science and evolution, we have, I guess, thank goodness, dozens more definitions of how species are defined. But then there's no universal definition. I do think there's something really important about endangered species when it comes to a species definition. Because if a coyote is carrying 70% DNA that is critically endangered, I'm going to play agnostic to whatever species definitions are out there, the ones that I might use in other situations. Because 70% of this genome is essentially critically endangered, I think almost any percent of red wolf DNA is worth valuing, especially when the endangered species is so critically at the doorstep of no new genetic variation. Inbreeding will continue to occur. Genetic diversity will drop. What options do we have? So instead of just stopping at the level of the individual, I really champion the admixture part, where I don't care if the coyote is 20% red wolf or 80% red wolf. I think that DNA is critically important. And I'm not saying we need to protect every coyote just to help the red wolf. But by goodness, we have so many techniques now to know which animals are indeed important, and we can start developing a plan to de-introgress, just like that little backbreeding example of cattle. We can find ways to pull that red wolf DNA out of those animals and concentrate it into potential options for the red wolf as a species, to give them new genetic information, new genetic variation, hopefully a boost in health of all sorts.
And now, sort of moving on to Colossal Bioscience and what they've done, they've actually brought they've brought some genes back from the grave, essentially. So they've found some unique genetic variants in DNA from extinct direwolves, and certainly at least one of the the genes, maybe more, one of the genetic variants was no longer circulating in any population as far as we're aware, and that's been brought back into grey wolves. Is that right?
Yeah. They have revived and given genetic variation that hasn't been in a living organism for 10,000 years. It is now living and expressing itself in these three, dire wolf pups. Mm-hmm.
And are we right to call them dire wolves, do you think? I mean, of course, I totally understand it's what they've done is technologically amazing, right? They've been able to bring back some genetic variants from the dead and bring them into living animals.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And of course, they want to champion that. So there's been a certain amount of sort of bold, we all play the press when we go out there and what have you, obviously. Is it true that, they've brought the direwolf back, do you think?
Well, they've brought they've brought the genes back. And I think for the most part, I don't really care what it's called. And it's been interesting to watch basically many people, the majority of people get sucked into the naming of something when most of the discoveries, the innovations, and the potential applications, I kind of get swamped out. I do think we tend to forget that Colossal has always talked about their mission and that goal of having proxies, whether you call them functional proxies or ecological proxies. Yeah. And we could call it a direwolf, we could call it a genetically modified gray wolf. The goal is, well, in my opinion, it's that they now have successfully edited and modified DNA, considering the welfare of the animals, both from being an embryonic stage up to a full-blown, multicellular, living, breathing, outside the uterus kind of animal, and will continue to monitor them to understand the challenges that this technology will need to incorporate for further iterations and improvements. Yeah, I mean, I think it is amazing what it is, despite lots of hangups on the nomenclature, and trying to balance, really, I mean, the taxonomic level and naming, I agree, is really important because a lot of regulation is built on that. But these animals also aren't being rewilded. There's lots of considerations about are they even going to be reproductively capable? There's comments about, well, they don't have giant sloths to be eating. I think there's a lot of losing the forest for the trees. And they're all good questions and lots of challenges that the technology is meant to now, move up a step and start facing those questions, whether it's philosophical, ethical, regulatory.
I mean, I think Colossal would have expected these questions and almost courted them as well with the headlines, right? It's natural for the general public's imagination. Those of people who've seen Jurassic Park, for example, and it's always been a part of sci-fi for as long, for all of us growing up. This idea of bringing animals, sort of extinct animals, back. So you can imagine. I think it's reasonable to expect the interest around the nomenclature, because it's not just about nomenclature. It's people have got these things in their imagination of, are we going to have these direwolves and what next?
Right. I think also to not lose sight that this DNA is really old, really degraded, and is it even feasible now to have 100% of that genome be brought to life? And no, it's not, but parts of it can be. And the goal is not to reanimate 100% of a direwolf. Yes. Colossal acknowledges that. I know that. But having this scope of broad biodiversity and ecosystems and ecosystem function, and having this focus on basically an apex predator, I get behind that. I like that scope. And even though another criticism is, there's no ecosystem, there's no Pleistocene ecosystem for these animals right now. Yeah, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't just to make a colossal dire wolf and say, okay, now there's an ecosystem because we'll put this somewhere and it'll make an ecosystem. No, the tools and the technology that we learn through making of the colossal dire wolves, and also cloning of these ghost wolves, these coyotes with red wolf DNA, like that builds up all of these new tools in our arsenal for when there is an immediate crisis that requires urgent action. We don't have to then wait the 5 years to test out, does the CRISPR, the gene editing work? And when you have a clone, we already know cloned animals face a different set of needs. So we better have the trial run already done before we need it. And this is where Colossal's coming in.
Well, what kind of crisis would that be? Sort of, can you give us an example?
Well, I think things like the rhino, where there's a handful of animals left, and we're looking for what are the ways to help the species from going full-blown extinct. Lots of biobanked samples for black-footed ferrets, for red wolves, knowing that there are species that face such inbreeding consequences that when you have a handful of animals left, again, it could depend on the biological system.
Sure.
Maybe 5 is enough and you can repopulate a species, but maybe you need 5,000. And how do you get to 5,000 if you only have 14 animals? But if you've biobanked something, now we can think about immediate cloning and reviving some of those unrelated genotypes, new genetic diversity. Like those are urgent, and those are situations that might arise and have like 2 years to figure it out.
Yes.
But we already know that gestation in wolves is a couple months. You need to raise an animal for a year before it's fully reproductively, even possible. Then you got to figure out, are we going to breed these animals, or do we collect gametes from them and then do reproductive assistance? Those very quickly add up to years on end to go from something that works. And Colossal, I think, is doing that. Let's see how it works and what we need to tweak and fix to get it to be a successful go-to option when we need.
Right.
So I appreciate we're running out of time, but so just very quickly, one of the arguments that you've touched upon and other people have made as well is there's the opportunity to bring back lost ecological function, and it's too early to tell whether the wolves that Colossal have produced have a lost function. We don't know that, and I'm not asking you to speculate on that. But I recently wrote a piece actually about what lost function, ecological function, is there that we might be able to bring back, and of course some of the most obvious loss of functions are the mega herbivores. So things like mammoths, for example, and the giant sloths you mentioned earlier. And I know we're not there yet, but do you sort of see any hope in the future for bringing back something that's a bit like a mammoth or something that's a bit like a giant sloth?
Colossal's plans for mammoths, Beth Shapiro has always acknowledged it's a difficult task. But I think we get more hope that task, whether or not failure, I mean, we could never see a mammoth, but along the way, that technology is going to help with lots of other aspects of those questions, whether it's understanding ecosystems, whether it's understanding how you genetically create the phenotypes you want. I don't know if anyone's thinking about sloths. We are now, especially with direwolf announcement. So I'm sure someone is, but those de-extinction programs, I think, have a nice, they've already set out the species that are either highest priority because humans caused their destruction, or highest priority because they're most recently extinct, meaning the DNA is a little bit more feasible. Direwolf, apex predator, we're seeing lots of crises with loss of not only the apex predator itself, but valuing them in the ecosystem. So I'm hopeful that a lot of this will kind of come together, and the different communities involved is just phenomenal. And the pace at which this private biotech company works is astounding. Federal government has their limited budget, which changes with every administration, and they have to reprioritize based on the money they get. Personnel is cut. We're seeing this now. Everybody was fearful of endangered species programs, not even talking about the regulation, but just staffing these programs. And so if biotech can come in and, sadly pull the weight for what I think our normal government should be valuing, hurrah for biotech, but they've also brought together a really diverse community of people. So we do think about lots of things from ecosystems to indigenous peoples and cultural impact and value, and developing new techniques, and also learning, in the academic sense, learning what we need to as we move forward.
Well, fantastic. I think we've probably run out of time.
Yeah, I think so. That was fantastic, Bridgett.
Thank you so much for joining us. And it's a very exciting time for biotech. There's no doubt about it. And it's great to sort of have a bit more of an in-depth discussion than sort of some of the snippets you might see on X or on Facebook. So thank you for taking the time.
And can I say, Bridgett, it was difficult for me to anticipate that someone might upstage me on this show in terms of hair color, but for sure you've done it. Wow, well, that was great. Bridgett was an excellent guest. And I think for me as a sort of educated but naive scientist in this area, I found her arguments very convincing. What did you think?
Oh, look, she's a world-class, world-leading geneticist. She's worked with Colossal. She's on the draft paper. They've put it up on what's called a preprint server, bioarchive, and we'll link to that down in the bottom. People can go and look at it. And I think she's right that they have brought back some genetic variants from the grave, essentially. The species concept, you were asking some interesting questions about that. It's actually a really complicated one, and there's a range of views as to what a species is. There are such things as species, but she's right, they can also hybridize. So no, I thought she put up a really good defense for what Colossal Bioscience has done. I think she did sidestep some of the questions about whether it's really a direwolf or not, which is fair enough. But I really enjoyed chatting to her, and yeah, someone has shown up your hair.
Yes, they have indeed. Absolutely. I'm defeated on the hair front.
For those who are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or one of the other providers, they should go over and look at YouTube for some. And I am definitely losing on the hairstyle front today.
Oh, I'm losing too today on that front. So, folks, in the next episode, we have a slightly different perspective on the direwolf story. So, please tune in for that for episode 2.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
See you.